Most contending teams would view the trade deadline as an opportunity to go all in, but the problem is, most contenders have a limited number of assets available that they could trade in order to improve their rosters, and most contenders are also financially limited by the new collective bargaining agreement. The only contender, though, who might not be worrying about these things right now is the OKC Thunder. With a historic stockpile of draft assets which include 15 first-round picks and 17 second-round picks between now and 2031 that they could utilize anytime, there are only a handful of players in the NBA who the Thunder lack the resources to trade for. And also, with their second and third best players, Jaylin Williams and Chet Holmgren, still on rookie deals through the end of the 2026 season, there's virtually no contract in all of basketball that they couldn't fit into their cap sheet before the second apron really starts to become a problem for them in a couple years. But then, for Sam Presti and his front office, the trade deadline has historically always been an exercise of patience. Plus, with the Thunder currently having the NBA's best record, while also currently sporting the third highest net rating in league history, only behind the 96 and 97 Chicago Bulls teams, there's a point to be made that OKC just doesn't have a lot of needs to be filled in their roster right now. Although for sure, Sam Presti is unpredictable, and by the time you're watching this video, he just might have pulled the trigger on a shocking trade deadline deal. But here, as a Thunder fan, I'll talk about why the OKC Thunder might actually be better off staying put despite having a million draft picks that they could use. So let's get to it. It's been a relatively quiet transaction period for the OKC Thunder, as the only high-profile name they've been linked to so far has been Brooklyn Nets wing Cam Johnson, but all the talk surrounding Cam Johnson to OKC has also died down considerably as of late. To some extent, that might be related to Brooklyn's high asking price for Johnson, which is reported to be at least 2 first-round picks to begin with. Though we gotta remember that in the 2022 NBA draft, the Thunder gave up 3 first-round picks to the New York Knicks in order to acquire Ousmane Dieng. So we still know that Sam Presti isn't shy to pull the trigger when it comes to spending draft picks for the right targets. So more than anything, I think OKC's hesitance to make significant moves this trade deadline could be a matter of organizational philosophy, a philosophy which puts a premium on patience and not being overly reactionary. Well, sure, for most teams, having a 37-9 win-loss record automatically means it's time to really go all in, but for the Thunder, this might barely be the beginning. We gotta remember that OKC's 8 most used players this season are all age 26 or younger, and based on how this team is playing and how they've been historically dominant in their wins, it might be entirely possible that the franchise can win its first NBA title in Oklahoma City even before J-Dub and Chet Holmgren's rookie deals expire in the summer of 2026. And if OKC plays their chips right, they have a chance to compete for NBA titles over the next 10 years, rather than pushing all in for a few title runs, say, for the next 3 to 4 years. So if that is the actual goal, I think employing patience makes sense. Well, for sure, contenders can use draft picks in a lot of ways. The last era of basketball was largely defined by teams using their draft picks as trade chips. But this current era, given the limiting effects of the second apron, will likely be defined by teams hoarding those draft picks to use them as weapons when roster building becomes much more difficult and much more expensive in a few years. Well, for sure, it's easy for OKC to maintain a deep 12-man roster right now with a ton of their players still under cheap rookie contracts. But then what happens past the summer of 2026 when J-Dub and Chet Holmgren are under second contracts? Cause as it currently stands, when you factor in potential max extensions for J-Dub and Chet that will kick in beginning in the summer of 2026, the team's salary for the 2026 to 2027 season alone already projects to be around $233 million, which is already $5 million above the projected second apron amount for that year. Meaning, past the summer of 2027, OKC's role players are going to be too expensive to keep. In the 2027 offseason, the contracts of Cason Wallace, Dort, and Isaiah Hartenstein are all going to expire, and then the offseason after in 2028, Isaiah Joe, Alex Caruso, and even Nikola Topic's contracts are also going to end. This is the time OKC can really utilize all those future draft picks to replace those players, as the Thunder can use all those picks to either draft players on cheap rookie contracts or to trade for other rotation pieces on reasonable deals who you can use to surround the big three of Shai, J-Dub, and Chet right at the time when they're all in their prime years. But for sure, there's a balance to all of this. If trading a couple of draft picks at the trade deadline could cover a significant weakness ahead of a potential title run, then a trade is probably worth making. Though I think the problem is, it isn't clear if this is the case yet for the Thunder. We gotta remember that this team has an 8-1 record with Chet Holmgren this season, and they are also 23-3 with Isaiah Hartenstein, and the team hasn't had a chance to have those two healthy on the court together yet. So I think there's a real argument here to be made that getting Chet Holmgren back from injury could qualify as OKC's mid-season improvement more than any other trade. But then, if there's another huge gap to address here, you could probably say that it's OKC's three-point shooting. The Thunder led the NBA in three-point percentage last season, but they've fallen to the middle of the pack this year, only ranking number 15 in outside shooting. Well, missing a solid floor-spacing big man in Chet Holmgren definitely affected OKC in that respect. But then it's also worth pointing out that while OKC only ranked 21st in three-point percentage for the first 2 months of the season, since December, they've actually been a top 10 three-point shooting team, and since the beginning of January, they've actually been the 6th best three-point shooting team in the NBA. So it might be safe to say that their below-average start to the season in terms of shooting might not actually be indicative of how good or how bad this team actually is in terms of floor spacing. Well, adding a 43% high-volume three-point shooter like Cam Johnson should definitely improve the team in that area, but at what cost? Even if we say that OKC would be willing to give up multiple draft picks to acquire him, OKC would still have to match at least Cam Johnson's $22.5 million salary this season to make a trade work. So are the Thunder going to send out Isaiah Joe in a deal? Joe is OKC's best three-point shooter as it is, and it's not clear how much of an upgrade Cam Johnson would be over him. Well, if it's not Joe, OKC would most likely have to ship out Aaron Wiggins, who I think is OKC's biggest X factor on both ends of the floor, and is also quietly emerging as OKC's best creator with the ball outside of Shai and J-Dub. Also, Joe is only making $12.9 million this season, and Wiggins is only making $10.5 million, so either of them alone still fall short of matching Cam Johnson's $22.5 million contract. That is unless you package both Joe and Wiggins together in a deal, which I think would be too much to ask from OKC. Well, Kenrich Williams or Ousmane can be used as trade chips, but is this really the time for the Thunder to give them up? There's a specific chemistry to this OKC team as it exists, and I think part of what makes their defense historic is that it lacks weak links. And everyone in this roster, including guys like Wiggins, Kenrich Williams, Dieng, and Isaiah Joe, are all highly switchable and competitive defenders who all contribute to that identity. Sure, Cam Johnson might not necessarily be a weak link on defense. His 6'8" frame is an advantage, but overall, he lacks the foot speed to stay in front of guards, and he also gets bullied by stronger forwards in the paint. And with him also not bringing a ton of shot creation, if OKC chooses to trade for him, they'd be paying a premium for his outside shooting alone. So if that's the case, you might be wondering, why don't the Thunder just pay that premium for a shot creator instead? Well, I'm not saying that the Thunder should trade for Collin Sexton, but he's having a great season for the Utah Jazz as a 41% three-point shooter who also brings 3-level shot creation, solid playmaking ability, and solid defense as well. Sexton could be that potential third creator and instant offense guy off the bench for OKC while making just $4 million more than Isaiah Joe this season. But another player who I think might even make more sense for the Thunder would be Lonzo Ball of the Chicago Bulls. He's making a pretty substantial $21.4 million this season, although he is on an expiring contract, and overall, Ball is a reliable spot-up shooter and a good defender whose full-court playmaking would fit like a glove in OKC's existing transition attack. But for sure, neither Sexton nor Lonzo Ball would come cheap. Both players would cost at least a couple first-round picks, and while the Thunder have the assets to make trades like that without necessarily feeling its impact as other teams would, I think doing so could still add up for the Thunder. OKC's experience with Gordon Hayward last season is a good example. Well, sure, the Thunder didn't pay much in terms of draft picks to acquire Hayward, as they only sent Charlotte a 2024 and a 2025 second-round pick. And sure, trading for Hayward also eventually helped OKC shed enough long-term salary to sign Isaiah Hartenstein over the summer. But even then, OKC still had to aggregate several small contracts such as that of Trey Mann and Vasilije Micic in order to get one big name who proceeded to give the Thunder nothing in the postseason. Well, maybe OKC could have figured out Hayward's fit with the team given more time, but again, that is time the Thunder won't have this season either. Integrating a significant piece in the middle of the season is always tricky, and the Thunder probably aren't going to be willing to give up several rotation players for one player in the middle of February again. Overall, moves like this are just easier to make over the summer, and sure enough, that's when the Thunder got Isaiah Hartenstein and Alex Caruso. In fact, the only players in the current roster who were acquired mid-season rather than during the offseason are two-way players Adam Flagler and Alex Ducas. Besides, OKC might have one notable advantage over other teams if they ultimately choose not to make a trade by the deadline. Looking at it, per the new collective bargaining agreement, teams above the first apron are effectively banned from acquiring players from the buyout market, assuming that player earned more than the mid-level exemption before his buyout. That clears quite a bit of competition away from OKC if they want to sign a mid-season free agent, as OKC still has their $8 million cap room mid-level exemption intact, which means they can afford to outbid a ton of contenders who only have minimum salaries left to offer. Well, for now, the buyout market looks quiet, but now that the Aaron Fox has actually landed with the Spurs, could we actually be looking at a possibility of OKC acquiring Chris Paul out of the buyout market at very little cost to potentially use him as a veteran presence and stabilizer for the Thunder's bench unit? Well, at the end of the day, the Thunder's front office will be diligent and pragmatic enough to explore all these options at the deadline, but for sure, they're also gonna be patient enough to not force anything just for them to happen, especially when this OKC team, as presently constructed, is already looking primed to win it all this season even without making a single trade. So, thank you guys if you've actually made it this far into the video, but do you actually think that the Thunder should make a trade for them to win the 2025 NBA title? Feel free to drop your thoughts in the comment section below, and again, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing as well. Again, this has been Real Balls, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.